Hi, Elaine here. Today I'll be sharing how you can replicate all the functionality of Adobe Photoshop Smart Objects using only Affinity Photo. We'll be using this free stock image from Pexels. It's a single layer, it's not Smart Object enabled just yet. It's a relatively simple image to Smart enable. Now, future videos in this Smart Object Mockup series will get more advanced, so be sure to practice this one before moving on. Now, the idea is to create a mockup where you're able to showcase an image as if it had been in that frame when the original image was taken. I have a few images to use for this purpose. They're not all the same size or orientation, but they are all going to need to fit in the space we have. Pro tip! A pro tip for working out the size to make a perfectly proportioned placeholder, or to be more accurate, to work out the ratio of the space that we're working with. And that pro tip is to use Affinity Designer and its measure tool. The measure tool was new in version 2 of Affinity Designer. So from inside Affinity Photo up to File and down to Edit in Designer. That will transfer the open file to Affinity Designer. Once in there, the measure tool is towards the bottom of the toolbar on the left. Click on that, and moving over to the image and zooming in a little bit just to make it clearer, we need to measure the space that we've got here. It doesn't need to be precise, but it does need to give us enough accuracy so we can work out a ratio. That is just about 730. I'm writing this on a post-it note, and then I need to measure the side of it. So working up from the bottom to the top corner, and we've got 1027. A ballpark figure here is enough. It really doesn't need to be that precise. It does need, however, to have the ratio as close as possible. That is all we need to do in Affinity Designer. So I will pass this file back from Affinity Designer to Photo using File, Edit in Photo. Now that does leave Affinity Designer open in the background. There it is, but I can close that. We're not going to need it anymore. Back into Affinity Photo, and we need to make a new file. Command and N or File and New, and I'm going to use the figures from the measure tool, which was a page width of 730 and a height of 1027. And press Create to create that file. This is going to be the placeholder for all those images, irrespective of their current size and or orientation. Now, you don't have to do what I'm about to do here. It's something practical rather than a requirement. Let's just call it best practice. And future you will thank present you, I guarantee it. So what I need to do here is to create a rectangle. So I'm using the rectangle tool and making it the full size of the canvas, giving it a nice fill, and the colour I'll use is FFBE98. That's Peach Fuzz, which is the colour of the year. Next thing I'm going to do is add some text. Pretty much this is a text-based instruction. And to make that a reasonable size so we can see it. Centering the text, and then positioning it in the centre of the image. Final tasks. Group those two elements together, Command and G. I will name this placeholder as that's what it is. And finally, I will lock it. And that is all we need to do in here. Final step is to save that file. And I'm saving it as an Affinity Photo file. Then we can close that file down. Now, back in this original file, we need to add the placeholder to this file. And there's two ways to place an image. You can drag and drop it from your file system, or you can choose File Place from the menu. I've created a shortcut for that since I use it so often. Now, if you use File Place, there are two ways to actually place the file. So up to File, down to Place, and then go and choose the file, which is Placeholder. And click Open. Doesn't do anything initially, but you can see the mouse pointer has changed. One single click will add that file at its default size. The alternative to that, so I'm going to click it and delete it and repeat the process, is File, Place. Again, choose the correct file and Open. And this time I'm going to draw it out. So those are your alternatives. Now, although at first glance that doesn't look bad, it's not perfect. Again, if we zoom in, you can see it is fractionally off, and that's because of the perspective of the frame. So the next step is to select our placeholder, which is an embedded file, and up to Layer, down to Live Filter Layer, Distort, and Perspective. We're now in live perspective mode. You can show a grid on this if that would help you in any way. You could also change the opacity if you need to see what's behind it, like that. I don't usually bother doing that. So I'm going to zoom into the corner and move it into position where it looks about accurate, and then repeat that process with the other 3 corners. So just dragging that up there, scooting all the way down to the bottom, and that is off by a considerable amount. I'll put that there, possibly 1 pixel that way, and moving across to the final corner. And putting that into place there. Command and 0 to see the whole thing, and that doesn't look bad. Now you can see in this some of the beveled edge, but I want to emphasize that to really make it look like the placeholder is subordinate to the outer white frame here. So making sure I've got that file selected, I'm going to add a couple of effects to it. So clicking the effect option in here, I'm going to add first of all an outline to it, just a single pixel outline, and the default colour of that is black. The other element I'm going to add is an inner shadow. Now there are various options here. I'm going to set the radius to 30. I'm not going to set anything for the offset, but you should see, because I've gone for quite a high value, what we've got is a very dark edge around it, and that will make it look more beveled. Intensity wise, I've tested this and 2% looks about fine to me. And click close on there. Clicking away, and you can now see the impact of that. Now I actually think, looking at this, the shadow is a little bit too much, but once we've got a real image in there, if it was any less intense you probably wouldn't see it. So the next step is to change the embedded image. And it's simple enough to do that. This is an embedded file. It is indicated by the symbol to the left of its layer. Double click on the thumbnail and it actually opens that file that you saw me create. It's embedded in this file now. And all I need to do here is to drag and drop my image in. Now I've got 4 that we're going to be working with. We've seen those. So first of all, I'm bringing in the pink flower. You can see just how much larger than the placeholder the actual image is. But zooming out so I can see the corners of it, I'm just going to reduce size and we'll go for the correct height. And then I'm going to place that in the middle. Now you can see with this, it's not really big enough. So I've got 2 options. I can either just stretch it out and see how that looks. A second option would be to get the width correct and then probably place that in the center. Either way will work. But the placeholder image that we have at the background is indicating to you the active area that you're going to have in the holding file. So anything that is not on that peach fuzz area, anything outside of that canvas, you're not going to see in the holding file. But if we switch back to the holding file, you can actually see it. So clicking away so we can see the edge properly, and there is our first image. Very, very simple to change that image. Go back into the embedded file, and you don't even have to delete what you've got in there now. I'm just dragging another one in, which is this butterfly. Now this time, not only is it much larger, but you can also see here the ratio is landscape, not portrait. But that doesn't matter. We're just going to focus on that butterfly. So I'm going to take it to the height and then position it. You could either have the butterfly to one side. If you're doing that with this image, I would suggest it would work better on the right hand side, or you could center it, but that's what I'm going for. And switching back to the main file, you can now see that we have that as a butterfly. I do have 2 more images. As you know, you've seen them. So the next one up is Kitty the cat. Let's drag her in. Again, you can see just how much bigger this image is, and again, this one happens to be landscape. So I'll go for the full height that we've got here, We've got a little bit more at the top there. And then zoom in and move it across. In fact, I think that's pretty perfect. Want to have a bit of the tail showing. And again, you can see that instantly updates in the main file. And finally, the last one is Sammy the Samoyed. So let's drag him on. And again, I think this is the biggest image. So let's take that down. And again, just treat the canvas in here as the window that you have onto this image. Now, with this image, if I center it, so let's get it so we've got the green and the red lines, it's actually slightly off center. So I'm moving that slightly to the right. And again, go back into our image, and there it is. The stacking order inside the embedded file determines which image is shown, and you can toggle those on and off as required. You do not need to remove them. So we could actually take this back to the butterfly and check that that has worked, or we can take it right back to being just the placeholder. Now that is why I took the time to create that placeholder, because without it, if I take that away, and we go back to our image, it's very difficult to even see that we actually have an embedded file in there. It is much better in your embedded file to have some degree of a placeholder, and that is what I do with mine. Let's go back to Sammy the Samoyed and make the point that the whole thing remains editable even after a save. So that needs to be compared with the Photoshop Smart Object enabled files that we looked at last time. And if you haven't seen that video, check the description below for a link to it. At that point, we have a fully native Smart Object enabled file made using only Affinity apps. Let's recap. Source a suitable image, and there are thousands of free stock images that work wonderfully for these situations. Use the measure tool inside Affinity Designer to work out the required ratio for the embedded image. Create a new Affinity Photo file using those measurements, and then save that as an Affinity Photo file. Place that file inside the hosting file, add a perspective live filter layer to it, and then position that as required. Apply effects for realism, and I applied 2, outline and inner shadow. The exact figures you'll use for that will be determined by the image itself. And then finally, edit the embedded file as required. And you're done. If you want new tutorials and tips and tricks on a regular basis, check out my free training at elainegiles.com/VIP. Hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss future tutorials. And if you have any requests for specific tutorials, be sure to contact me. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.